to Down Your Unders. Down Your Unders. Review and dissection of content from some of the sharpest minds in the game. Hosted by Adam Camilleri. Art of War. Down Under.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this episode 136 of the Art of War Down Under podcast. My name is Adam Camilleri, as freaking always it shall be. And we are here to do a very interesting episode that I haven't really been putting it off. I've just been kind of waiting until I could get the right kind of crew together for it. Much like a heist movie, much like an Ocean's 11, I need the right people to take this one on. This is a State of the Superfaction episode for the Superfaction being Xenos, the only Superfaction that does not play together. They are just four things just in their own little pod, and none of them get to play. And it's an interesting thing to try and unpack for one of these episodes, because I could kind of do one of these for each of these factions individually, but instead I've decided to put together a dynamic duo of faction experts. The first and foremost being Mr. Thomas Byrd, you may know from various things, and I'll let him take it from here. Hello, mate. Welcome to the show.
Hey, welcome. Thank you for having me. So yes, I'm Thomas Byrd. I am based out of Atlanta, in the southeast of the U.S. here. I play a lot of Ultramarines. That's what I'm not really known for, but I have been picking up the Votann mantle as of late. I find it funny to put them in that Xenos category. I don't even think they have the Xenos keyword, but where else would they fit, I guess? So you find me on the internet, Tabletop Life. My team name is Pro Tabletop, so that works as well. Search there. We have a lot of content for competitive 40K.
Shout out to Jaime. How you doing, brother?
Yeah, Jaime Pence is part of our group. So, if you know Jaime and his Space Wolves, he's going to be doing some more content for us. He is been off doing grad school, trying to be a responsible adult. So he hasn't had as much time to be out and doing all the tournaments. But we do talk quite frequently. And then I'm also associated with Warzone Atlanta. That's my team. That's my crew.
Fantastic.
So if you're ever in Atlanta and attend that event, Warzone Atlanta is one of my favorites.
It's one of your keystone events. In addition, I've brought on Thomas. You may have heard him 2 weeks ago as one of the interviews I did at Cherokee Open, and I noticed he was kicking ass and taking names with the Votann there, and so hence he is on here as our Votann expert for this episode. The next of our dynamic duo is representing the Greenskins. You've seen him, you've heard him, you know him. Ben Jurek, welcome back to the show, mate.
Wah, Adam, wah.
Wah indeed, sir. A hearty wah to you. And welcome, mate. How are you doing? What have you been involved with recently?
Recently, I've been doing a lot of scrimmaging and practice for Team USA. So
exciting.
Bringing up Jaime again, he's definitely on the team and getting a lot of practice in with those guys. Other than that, I have been relatively media absent. Have been participating in too many casts or much else, but it's been doing a lot of grinding with a lot of different lists and getting ready for Belgium. So.
Dude, very exciting. Now, notably, the first and second part of this episode are going to be taking place on different days, and unfortunately, or somewhat may say fortunately, Ben is not able to join us for the part 2, enabling us, of course. The loss of a Ben is no mean thing, but enabling us to get on an expert from Tau or Necrons. And I will be trying to get on a Necrons expert for the part 2 of this. So we'll have, there'll only be one faction not represented on this State of the Superfaction double episode. And that being the Fish Cows. And you know what? They can just wait a little bit longer. I'll catch them on the next one. But if you guys do not know, these episodes come out for you guys Tuesday mornings, and they are in 2 parts. The first part, it comes about by myself and Seamus Ronan, does all the editing. Thank you very much, Seamus. And you can get the part 2 over on the Art of War Down Under over on Patreon. We just have a brand new Discord we've also just launched that is hopefully going to be bubbling away and have a very nice, beautiful community growing in it. But jumping in, when we do one of these State of the Superfaction episodes, we look at each of the factions therein, and we talk about them, unpack them, how are they doing in the current matter, how are they feeling at the moment. And usually we're able to talk about them holistically as one thing, like we can talk about Eldari as one whole, but we can't really do that in this one. So we're going to jump through all the 4 factions therein, and if it pisses anybody off, the Votann are in the Xeno section. The only reason they're in here is because G-Dub has categorized them in the Xeno section of their website. That is literally, if they're going to call them Xenos, I guess I'll call them Xenos too. I essentially feel like they're about as human as Rattlings and Ogrins. And I think, Thomas, you pretty much echo that sentiment.
Yeah.
It's pretty much the same thing, right?
It is. I think, yeah, put them somewhere, right? Where are you going to put them?
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, so I'm going to hit it over to Ben, first, what's the state of Orks at the moment? Just a quick hot take.
The state of Orks, we're in pretty good shape, with few exceptions.
Nice. State of Votann, my good man Thomas.
I think Votann is they definitely got hit with the nerfs, so the points are very tough. Arks of Omen do give you some options with some new stuff, and I think they're pretty good. I think the secondaries are tough, but you have a lot of killing power. So if you can play armies that let you attack them, or if you play in good terrain that lets you attack, then you're going to be able to do some good work.
Yeah, I feel like it's much more. There's a lot of generalship needed to wield Votann at the moment, and I think you really want to know what terrain you're going into before you design your list. But that is for later when we get to them for the full breakdown. I'm going to give a hot take on Necrons in that I feel like they've been somewhat abandoned in Arks of Omen, despite I think Arks of Omen being quite kind to them, and that you really don't need to take any troops if you want. If you want to just take Nihilak, nothing but Scarabs and Tomb Blades and good stuff, you can totally do that. But the player base has really abandoned them, despite I think their secondaries only got marginally worse. They're still some of the best in the game. So I think they're still doing really well. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I've seen a lot of people that same way. I don't know that if it's just because we figured it out or we've had more tools to deal with them. Maybe if you're Marines or your other factions, you have more power, more models on the table. It just, their secondaries, they still can score pretty good, but they just die. And I don't feel threatened when I see a Necron person across from me. I'm like, I just don't care about your army.
Well, that's very telling, isn't it? You don't feel threatened. And I suppose we're going to be talking about Necrons and Tau from more of the case of the opponents of them and giving our impressions of how we face them, we go across them and how struggling they are. So I do apologize if we're not able to give you the intense player of those factions opinions, but we can only do what we can do. And I've realized that trying to have 3, sometimes even 4 guests on the show is kind of not good content. It just leaves too many people in the wind without talking. But anyway, Ben, what's your take on Necrons?
I think Necrons have the same issue that any like super meta army has when the mass exodus just leaves them, when they aren't like the obvious choice to score and win points with, and then you just end up with the specialists and the people that just enjoy playing them, keeping them around. So all you're left with is that player base and then the skill that's left in that player base. So while it's still a good army, the majority of people just aren't going to gravitate toward them because they're just not as good as they were.
Yeah, very well said. And it's even if the nerf isn't real, and unfortunately the nerf was very real, even a perceived knock is almost enough to get people to abandon factions wholesale these days. Thomas, what's your impression of Tau?
I feel like, before the predominant list was with the planes, you kind of had the 1 or 2 builds. And I think that you still kind of see that, you had to take the planes out, but the lists are still, you're kind of the same. You may have a couple Riptides, you may have, Hammerheads, but you get the 1 unit suits are too expensive. The list becomes very static in what it can do. Like, it's very punishing. It can shoot you really bad, but if you know how to answer that, or if the terrain doesn't allow them to do their things, they struggle. I think it's tough for Tau.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. Ben, what do you think?
I think they got hit with the nerf bat the hardest out of all the Xenos factions. In fact, Orks didn't even get nerfed; they got buffed. But they, without the planes and their point increases across the board, they're really kind of like pigeonholed into a couple of roles, and those roles don't score 9th edition 40k.
Yeah, I feel like they're just pushed into that win more category where the secondaries are only good if they're already dominant. They don't necessarily play things like banners very well. They're not dynamic enough to guarantee good scores on behind enemy lines against every opponent. It's interesting that you said that they got nerfed the most, because I would have thought the perception was that Votann got hurt the most, but then I realized that Votann got pre-nerfed. Like they got
pre-nerfed.
It was getting hurt. I don't know if that's still hurting.
It wasn't even like they came out and got a balanced data slate. They were just like, nah, slap him, and then they slapped him again for some reason. Thomas, what was your impression of that? Was that necessary at all?
No. I mean, of course, I'm the Votann apologist, because I was like, it's not that bad whenever I was playing the very first one. It was really bad. But for them to get nerfed before like the book was even released, I was like, golly, at least give people a chance to try to figure it out. But the internet backlash was pretty high. So I was kind of like, as the guy who's super excited about this brand new army, for them to hit it so hard, I was kind of a little hurt. But, once you kind of toned it down, you're like, this is still good. It's still hard. There's some holes in the army as you're always trying to tweak stuff. And then they hit them again. You're like, I just don't even understand it. Like, they're not that good, So but it's funny when you run up against someone, when you play an army and someone has not seen it, that's not an army that you have years of experience playing against. and they get the bad touch from Votann, because if you just don't know, like, you can get caught off guard. Like,
Absolutely.
the visceral response is huge. Like, I played a lot of armies that are like people just hate, Eldar, Tau, they just generate hate before you even start playing, and they like people look at you, you're like, you're a mean person. So I get it.
Yeah, I mean, I hope they don't end up being. I mean, the obvious one is like Tau has that stigma about them that it's just playing Tau. Like, oh, congratulations on your Codex guns, and I think there is a stigma about that. Votann might be going a similar way, but that is for our next section, because before that, we're going to do the full breakdown for the state of Orks. I am going to, Thomas, you are going to be involved. Do not check out or fall asleep, sir. But jumping into the state of Orks, what is the best things that Orks have going for them right now in Arks of Omen and Ben Jurek?
The best things is they're still stellar secondaries. We did lose one. We did lose the biggest and the bestest, which was just a stupid passive one where you could have a war boss stand on a no man's land objective for 5 turns and score you 10 points as long as he didn't die.
Yeah.
And if they try, he gets more points. So just silly. But for some ungodly reason, while they were like throwing darts at the board to decide what to buff and nerf, they buffed get the good
the best one.
I don't know what they did to get the good bits. Why?
So now it's 4 per activation and caps at 6. So like that secondary alone is just absolutely silly. And then, of course, they still have Stomp 'em Good, and they still have Green Tide, which also became easier to score. So you have lots of options to score and lots of modes to play the army, because your typical like Goth pressure list is just going to push at you, but you can also just choose to hang out. You can choose to be cagey. There's so many options on how to play the army, and you can build lists around that. A second to the secondaries, which most people might actually think is the best thing to have in Orks, is the changes in Arks in general, mostly the loss of AOC. The venerable Choppa is back.
Yeah.
So your Storm Boys, your Beast Naked Boys, everybody with their neg 1 AP now actually does real damage across the board. So everything's way more lethal, and you have so much more power just out of little groups of 100-point boys to go and kill whatever you want.
Because it was for all of Nephilim essentially that a Rend 1 or even Rend 2 just did not matter. It was irrelevant. It might as well be Rend 0. And yeah, that has been a huge lift for them. So over to you, Thomas. In your opinion, as a person who has crap secondaries on your faction, do you look at Orks and think that Get the Good Bits and the Orc secondaries are the best in the game, is the best secondary suite?
In the game, well, that's a strong statement. They're certainly good. They're certainly really good. And as a person who has kind of substandard secondaries, you're always jealous of the other faction. You're like, man, you must be nice, right? So then you're like, well, how can I overcome it, right? And you always have to try to dissect that. And it's funny because you talk about I could play these Orks a little different, right? I'm very used to seeing Orks play very aggressive. You used to the Goth Orks just running at you. And so every now and then you'd be just like, well, Orks, I know what they're going to do. And you don't even look at the list. You're just like, it's Orks. They're going to do Ork things. And then you come across the list and they're like, oh, I'm just going to stay back here and score. And you realize you're like, well, this is going to go real bad for me if I don't start attacking these Orks. So, no, I think, they're very high up there. It's really rough, especially when they put pressure on and they could just sit back and score. It's just like a double whammy.
Yeah.
It's between like Warp Ritual, Good Bits, and Green Tide. Sure, I'm just gonna hang on my half, homie. You stay over there. Like if you have good terrain, and you're just gonna score points, and your opponent's gonna be sad about it. If there was a tier of secondaries, I think World Eaters is a tier above Orc secondaries, but Orc secondaries are definitely up there.
Well pointed out. Yeah, I do believe they're the only one that has it better. They could argue that they're better even. I think between Orcs and them, the rest is like a little way of a nice little gap between. And what you say is totally true. Like you can just be like, yeah, well, this half of the table is mine. Oh, did you stage up to try and come to my half of the table, sir? Wow.
Yeah, the counter charge on Orcs is absolutely brutal.
We'll send them all in. Do Orcs need any buffing or nerfing at the moment, do you believe?
I don't. I think Good Bit should go back to what it was. I will admit to that. There's a couple of things that are definitely fair pointed, and there's very few matches where I feel overcosted or underperforming. But those things are broken in their own right, and it doesn't mean I need a buff. It just means they need a nerf. So like playing in the Space Wolves, for example, it's the one of the few times where I feel undercosted. Like the group of Sky Claws is just silly. Like at 110 points. So I think a lot of armies should be at the point to power level that Orks are, as far as like what you will see on a 2,000 point table versus Marines bringing 3,000 points of stuff.
Yeah, that is totally fair. Thomas, what's your impression? Do you think there's anything that needs to overtly change in Orks?
No, I think he nailed it. I mean, it's pretty good. I mean, a couple of our Ork guys, Damian Owens, was our big Ork players, and he was real sad at first because the Arks changed how he had to build his list. But after he started messing around with it, he really liked it. It's really just that one secondary, which you can get 6 points. It's kind of like, hey, are y'all playing Necrons? It's kind of like you go back to that where they just score points.
That was the analogy when Arks of Omen first came out. I said, well, okay, so Necrons are no longer what Necrons were, but GSC and Orks are now the new Necrons. They just do the passive scoring bonanza. But anyway, that whole process, guys at home, if you haven't heard one of our State of the Super Factions before, that whole process we're going to do for every other faction now. So next up is Votann, and Thomas, take it away. What are the best things about Votann in the Arks of Omen meta?
Wow, the best things about Votann. Well, obviously, Ymir and Greater Thurian are the two chapters, the two leagues that you would take, and I think Ymir's kind of got the most, which is kind of sad because there's some neat other factions in there, and you really just can't even play around with some of the custom factions because Ymir is just so good. That invulnerable save on everything just makes that list work, and then you add beams on top of it, and it adds a whole other layer. So beams are crazy.
So we're going to have to hold fire for a second because I forgot one part of this breakdown, which is when the expert of the faction gives us an example list of something you would likely see or likely take for that faction at this time. So Ben, are you able to give us a good example of a Orks list that you would happily take or people should expect to see across the table for them?
So I'll give an example of the list I'm bringing to the Rocky Mountain Open. What I'm bringing this weekend will consist of a beast boss on Squigosaur, and I'm actually packing him with an attack loadout of the Beasthide Mantle and Prop Achille. Prop Achille adding additional AP and an additional attack to help deal with some of the Terminator menace out there, and bringing in a whole crapload of attacks, and then also like cranking out just 4 AP and on the jaws and everything else. It's gonna be a lot of fun with him. Then we have the boss on bike with the Killer Claw and Brutal but Cunning, so he gets to retry all his stuff that fails. He's always trades up. That's what he does. That's exactly all he's going to do. And he is an absolute menace at being able to go 20 inches and touch something. Then we have a Weird Boy and Boss Zagstruck. Boss Zagstruck being the Goth exclusive character, and he absolutely currently wrecks face, especially with AOC being gone. In the troop slots, we have 3 groups of Gretchen for your obviously get the good bits, and zoning out such things and keeping your opponent away from you, or if you have like a pregame move you're worried about, they just kind of like hang out in front of stuff you don't want to get touched. On top of that, you have the 2 groups of Beast Naked Boys are going to hang out inside my 2 kill rigs, which exist in the heavy slot. And then we move on to the fast attack slot. The fast attack is going to be I'm only bringing 2 groups of Squig Hugs this time, and those would be little groups of 3. Let me make sure I'm reading you the right list before I get too far ahead of myself, because I want to misquote myself and be above points. And then we have a group of 5 Storm Boys and a group of 10 Storm Boys.
Ooh, yeah.
Storm Boys are becoming one of my favorite units in the Arks of Omen, just because that AP does real damage now, and they're able to hop over all the move block and everything else that you need them to. And then in the elite slots, I have 2 10-man bricks of commandos, each packing some bomb squigs, of course. And then we also have a group of knobs, 8 of them, in fact. There'll be 4 with claw and 4 with the big chopper. That's a big change in Arks of Omen, is that all those equipment became a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
And they get the Truck Boy specialist attachment, so they move hecka fast. with the all-important truck being packed into the list.
I love that unit. I personally am a huge fan of the regular Nob at the moment.
Yeah, and like in cover, they're 3-up, and they're pretty nasty. And I, at 130 some points, I really don't care what they do. Like as long as they as long as they trade up, it's not super big investment. As long as they're doing their job, I'm more than happy. So this that's basically the list, and it is pretty freaking solid. I've been practicing with this one a bit. There's another one that I really like that I'm probably going to switch to after this one, but this is one I'm bringing to Colorado.
Fantastic, and can't wait to see what you do with it. Thank you very much, and sorry for the interjection, Thomas. I realize we gotta be completionists. We got to do everybody their justice. So back to the Short Kings. Best things going for Votann, mate. Feel free to reiterate or pontificate.
Oh wow! So best things, right? So, man, I've forgotten the factions, right? So we talked about Ymir being kind of the number one faction. So beams are powerful. The ability to do mortal wounds, they're the list that are going to dump mortal wounds. There's several ways they can do that. So I think if you're not taking advantage of beams or mortal wounds in Ymir, you're not really doing it full justice.
Yep.
I think, we talked about trading. Votann don't want to trade, right? They don't have that many units. They don't play that trading game. They want to take and they want to take and they want to take. And then all their secondaries are all based around killing. So you really have to gear your list up to destroy, and you have to be very aggressive in that. So, I mean, you have to be cagey on those units that can deep strike and Ark of Omen. So you really have a lot of people that can come at you from reserves. So it does keep you on your toes. It's not an easy army to play, as you kind of mentioned or alluded to. But when it pops off, judgment tokens go, and if you can manage that judgment token, if you can recycle them, that becomes super hyper efficient, and they can just destroy even the most toughest armies, just like that. So I think that's what you have going for you, is just the ability to destroy. You still have armor of contempt, no reroll wounds. It's incredibly powerful, so your armies are much more durable than your average Marine army that it used to be. So you kind of catch that and keep guys alive. And it's really all about when people attack your units and they allocate a certain amount of force to it, and then it underperforms. I underestimate how much it takes to kill that unit because of the no rerolls, because of the armor of contempt, what have you. Then you can get them to expose units and put them in a bad place. And if they do kill you, all they did is do a bad thing and give you a judgment token. So you're like, hey, something good, that really is good for you as well. So you just got to try to maximize that. So from a Votann perspective, it always feels bad to lose units, but when it ends up helping you also, you get a little extra out of it. So it's an interesting army to play. And from playing an army that I don't like losing models, I can never play a Horde army. I hate losing models. So it fits well in my playstyle.
Do you find that the judgment tokens are becoming like a lever you can really pull in some of these transhuman-based matchups where that's the only polarizing thing?
Yeah, I mean, so like so even with my Ultramarines, because I build in a lot of rerolls. This army has tons of rerolls. So even with transhuman, I have never really had a lot of problems with those types of armies. But certainly with Votann, when you're just doing it on the hits, you can get around that. The challenge with judgment tokens is the misconception is it's just everyone's walking around with 3 judgment tokens all the time, and that's just not the case. Like, you could set it up that way to get a couple units, but it takes a lot of work, right? And as you kill units, those tokens don't just necessarily magically reappear. So you have to build it up. It takes time, and your opponent can stymie that if they don't cooperate. So
for sure.
It takes a little bit of work. So I feel like out of any of the armies, Votann is one that's well suited to beat up on armies that have that sort of mechanic. They don't really care. Like, if they're playing Custodes, you're like, Dark Angel Terminators, those lists aren't typically a problem if they let you attack. So unless they hide in the building the whole time, you're going to be able to kill them, no problem.
Yeah, and you're pretty happy if they don't want to come out and tangle with you and just going to let you stay at 24 inches and use all your guns. That's probably very acceptable too. Worst things going for Votann at the moment. What are the things holding them back, if anything?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about their secondaries, but it's pretty straightforward, right? You have 2 book ones that are kind of like competing with standard ones. You have a win more one, which is kind of the go-to lay claim, is like you score objectives at the end of the game, and it's kind of like as you're standing on their dead bodies. So if you're not destroying all of them, you're not going to score that one, but that's kind of like your go-to one, right? So you don't even have one that you can guarantee 15 on. You really have to kill your opponent, and they get to place those objectives. So if they place them in a difficult spot, you're really going to have to work hard. So it changes how you play depending on where they place them. And then the other ones are based around tokens. So again, you could throw a lot of tokens, or they could force tokens in a bad spot that you don't get to, and then you're subtracting points from your score at the end. So it's very, very tricky. And then we talked about limited amount of units. Like there's just so many,
like almost custodian level,
awesome.
like
yeah,
elite
they cost
elite,
a lot of points, right? They cost a lot of points, and you don't have that many models. So when you start talking about activations, unit activations, models on the table, resources to physically do actions while you're moving up and aggressively attacking, because again, this list has to move up and attack. It starts to become, an action economy where you just don't have enough units to do all the things. So,
dude, yeah, very well said. Ben, what has been your impressions and best and worst things going for Votann? If you've played into them or had an experience playing as them.
The thing I always feel bad about them for is the secondary situation where like I'm in middle of turn 3 playing them. I'm playing an army that denies primary well, and I'm also scoring secondary. So if there's a board where I'm able to take position, and like the point differential on turn 3 can be absolutely silly.
Yeah.
And like in the games I can lose the Votann, I get tabled and they get to do their win more stuff and actually win. But if I don't give that up, it's a very difficult game for Votann. But the things I do like about the things that they definitely have a few things going for them, but they have so few activations, so few models, and on top of the secondaries, I salute anyone like willing to take that challenge, because like that's one small like, oh, I moved a half inch too far mistake from just like losing a complete unit and that unit being your loss, where I can make all the mistakes in the world and just lose like 3 units and still have 10 more units to kill you with.
So it really feels like Votann are in a lot of ways an army that gets to have some melee and some counter assault and a lot more little bits and pieces, but they're like Tau in that they have a handful of alpha level units that have to do all their heavy lifting, and if those things swing and they miss, they're kind of screwed. And then unlike Tau, they don't have the resilience of just being like, well, I guess my drones will just absorb the first time I swinged and I missed, and then I'll go again next turn. Things of that all, they don't have riptides or commanders that can just jump around or jump off in and off terrain and not be shot or uninteractive. Everything the Votann shoots or charges, they have to be able to shoot and charge. There's no real ways to jank the system. The best way they have to do it seems to be the judgment tokens, to just get around people's defensive mechanics and things like that. Is that safe to say, Thomas? And then in addition, it just really seems like every single one of their secondaries is only a good secondary if you are annihilating your opponent.
It's right. It's a feel bad army, right? Like it's made to destroy you. So as an opponent, if you're getting destroyed, no one likes that. I get to turn off all your rules. Like you don't get to re-roll against me. I get to auto wound you, this, that, and the other. So like it just starts to feel bad for your opponent if you're doing really well as a Votann, or if you're just getting crushed because you just don't have enough units, or this, that, and the other. Then you feel bad as a Votann player because you're just like, it's not fair because I just don't have enough things, right? So I don't have all the free melted guns that all the Marines do, right? Yeah,
exactly right. Well, so like, give us sorry, we'll do that in a second. But around about how many units do you start a game with as a Votann player?
So for me, I have 3 characters. That's kind of, it goes back and forth if you want to take the third one. I have 2 fighting units, 3 like fast bike units, which are my OBSEC, and then I have like 3 vehicles. So I actually have a fairly amount for a Votann list. A lot. So I still have 2 Thunderkin units, right? But they're all packed full points, right?
So that's all
work units. There's nobody sitting around.
Is that 11 units? Is that right that you listed?
So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 plus the 3 characters.
So 13. All right. Just for the lulz, Ben, the army you listed just then, how many units does that have?
Let me pull that up just to be 100% sure.
and while you're doing that, Thomas, what would you like to see change for Votann, if anything?
Man, that's tough, right? Because obviously you'd like to give them another secondary or 2 it's not just solely based on killing. And you can take some book secondaries, right? But it's very intentional, and it conflicts with your other secondaries, so it kind of hurts. You like to lower points, but again, that starts to get in a little dangerous area because, there are very, very killy. So if you just give me more killy stuff, I'll take it all day long, right? And so that doesn't solve some of the core mechanics. But when people ask me, like, how do you fix Votann? You're like, well, you take away the judgments or whatever. or do you tone that back? I'm like, I don't even know what that looks like. Like what do you just limit it to 6s, 5s? Like do you not go all the way down to 4s? I rarely ever get to a situation where I have 4s, so that's not something that I get to have very often.
Yeah.
So I don't know what it would take to fix them.
That's fair. First and foremost, what's the secondary that keys off judgment tokens units dying?
Ancestors are watching.
Remove the downside. Remove the downside from that secondary. Remove the downside.
Yeah, so if you don't lose points on that one, so that was also interesting because how do you calculate it? Because I see people I have arguments about how you calculate it. So you score points for killing units with judgment tokens. Every phase you get 2 points or 3 points, right? So you can score. I kill something shooting. I kill something fighting. You have to be careful with measured because one, you have to kill it. It has to have a token, and two, you can't kill too many things in one turn because you're still only going to max out 2 points or 3 points per one phase. But the negative, like you said, is at the end of the game, if anyone's left with tokens, then you lose points for every unit that's still alive, right? So the question on that one is, if I get 22 kills or 22 points, does it go past 15 and then minus, so I can still get overscore, or does it like cap at 15 and then minus down, right? So no one really knows. It depends who you ask.
I think you just remove the downside of that one, and then they actually have a keystone, like get the good bits level secondary that they can build around, they can plan for, gives them a bit of security, a bit of reliability of their score. Because right now, it's exactly what you guys described. When Votann are winning, sick, 90 plus points. When they're losing, cool, 30 points. It's way too polarized. You can't get like a good bell curve, or you can't get anything. It's just a zigzag, on the graph of scores. There's nothing very reliable there. And sorry, did you have that count for us, Ben?
I did. Sorry, it took me so long to count that. It was a lot of units. It's 19.
So 6 more units. So 50% more units than the Votann army. So they had 13. You've got 19. So yeah, about 50% again on top. That is pretty funny. That is actually not as many as I thought. I thought you'd have like 21 or something, but
it doesn't sound like that much, right? No. I feel like this list, my current Votann list, has more units than my previous list.
You have. That's one of the things I really liked about your list. It felt like you actually had enough stuff to play 5-turn games. Like, because I actually really worry about some Votann lists when you are forced into a couple of trades. You get to turn 3 and you have no army because you just did like 3 trades. You're like, oh, well, there's my army's gone. It's just a really rough place to be. But Ben, with yourself, what do you think, if anything, could be done to change Votann for the better or for the worse?
Honestly, they can undo the majority of the point reductions. Like, it's most of that's uncalled for at this point, especially with their other rules. They're getting nerfed 3 different ways at once is not good game design. Like, you gotta, tilt the scale one way, not tilt it 3 different ways and pull the different levers to try and figure out if the army is going to be, competitive or not. It is a feel-bad army. It's a hard to balance army due to its math just being wacky, due to its like core mechanics. So I have empathy for the people writing the rules for this, but throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall and praying it works kind of puts them in a place where you either are hitting, like you said, hitting home runs or doing a whole lot of nothing.
Well, they wrote an army that is just hard to balance. They legitimately wrote they made a predominant shooting faction army that is Tau, that has to be, so essentially they wrote another Tau, but has to be not Tau, has to be distinct in flavor, design, and mechanics. And so then how do you manage that? How do you and
it's such a weird army when you start skewing stuff, because like it's dangerous, because if you drop pioneers by 20% or something, suddenly 18 pioneers is just going to be a freaking problem, because they're going to be able to put points on other things that hold backfield objectives, and 18 pioneers is going to table you. Like, it's a hard thing to do, because I say point reductions, but like that's also very dangerous when considering like just how much weight certain units can take. So I have a lot of empathy for there, but some of the stuff it's getting absurd. Like a berserker, for how many points it is like compared to other things in the game, it's like, okay, like why is he cost so much?
Well, so how much is it? How much is like a? Sorry, you go, Thomas.
I was going to say, berserks are an interesting one, because like I have mine with the mole launcher, which adds more points to it. So like a 5-man unit of berserks is 175 points, which is like crazy. Yeah. And if you don't take a mirror and you just take them as a different faction without the invulnerable save, like they're wildly different in their survivability, and use. So it's like it costs a lot for that top. You want to use them in a mirror to get the full value out of them. In a greater 3, and they're just not even close to the same. So I don't even know how you judge those points distinctly like that.
It's really wild. The internal balance is just so buck wild as well. But anyway, give us an example list, Thomas Byrd, of something people could expect to see on the table, or might want to look into playing as.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll give you my list. I don't necessarily take the most prevalent type of list, but this one's been tuned over and over again, so I feel like it's a very powerful list. The kind of choices you make with Votann are they lead to like a few outcomes, right? So do you want to play with 2 tanks or 1 tank? The big tank. There are a few builds with no tanks, so you can go that route. And play with Sagittars. Like, good luck if you can find some, because like a lot of the builds are like limited on what you could physically buy. But my list is kind of balanced, right? So I have a little bit of everything. I got 1 big tank. I got 2 little tanks. I have 2 units of Berserk, so I have some counterattack or some fighting. You have to take the obligatory bikes because they're just so good, but just 3 units of 3. I think taking 6-man bikes, they're just very big footprint. There's some negatives there. They shoot like a brick, and you can go first, and they could do a lot of work, but I just think that unit is just too much, especially with the points the way they are. You have to have more things in those bikes. And then the characters. So what really got the juice flowing was the Thunderkin. They kind of lowered them back to their original points cost. That was the only thing that went down because no one was taking Berserks, or Thunderkin, I should say. And I really liked those models. So I was like playing around with them, and they're really good. So they add some value. But what they did take away was the troops, right? So no troops. You could take some heavy foot builds, but it just doesn't make any sense on the cost that they are. They're just so expensive. Troops are great. They do some work, but they're not worth that much. With Arks not having to take troops, it really changes the equation on what you want to do list-wise. So my list has no troops in it, so I can't get any of those free secondary, get some command points. So my list is 3 characters. I got the High Call. He's basically your chapter master. He's got the teleport crest so that you can try to late game teleport to pick up a late claim objective.
Yep.
He's got long lists and grudges in, so that's kind of like the sniper build. He can target characters that have tokens on them. He's pretty powerful, and he also lets you recycle judgments. Again, that's very important as you kill units to try to keep the judgments on the table so you can keep that efficiency up. You never want to have a turn where you lose all your judgments and you have to start from scratch. I have a Grimnir. I like that guy because I generate a lot of use out of my stratagems. I spend a lot of CP per turn. I'm doing more wounds. I'm doing full rerolls.
Yep.
I'm doing a lot of things. I'm shooting and getting judgment tokens out with bikes. Like, I spend a lot of command points. So if the command points run out, you're in trouble with Votann, and that guy is in there for just that reason. He's literally hiding in the back. Even if you have warp ritual or something, I don't want to go up there and deny. I'm literally like, I don't want to put my guy in a position where you can block me back, right? I need that command point more than I care about you getting a psychic ritual off, because if you keep that secondary off or that psychic power off, that means you're going to get a judgment token, and I kind of like that. So I just don't want you to get it too often and score all the points. So it's really interesting where you position that guy. 2 units of Berserks, we talked about those guys, super expensive. I go back and forth whether I like them, but every time I take them out, I'm like, no, these guys are MVPs. When Berserks pop off, Berserks are crazy. So, against some armies, those are the guys that win you the game. So you got to have some fighting these days, and I think they do. They fight. They have all the rules for fighting. They're great. The 3 bike sets are only OPSEC. They are fast. They have the pregame moves that can win you games by itself, but they're really kind of a judgment token generator, right? Early game, they're putting pressure. They're getting you those objectives while you're slow moving into position. And then you kind of purposely trade them out to set up judgments and set up your counterattack. And with beams, you're able to take 1 unit and potentially kill multiple units with 1 shooting phase. So it's very powerful because you have so few activations. So if you can get for 1 on a unit of beams, that's crazy town. So that's really good. Sagittars. Yep, I'm going to keep going, right? So Sagittars, real quick, 2 Sagittars. I put the missile launchers on them. They basically come with the autocannons, just a bunch of 2 damage guns. But putting the missile launchers on them after the fact, it just clarified that you get both missile profiles. Now they become this 40-inch range kind of shooting thing that can kind of hang back, or also just zip up super fast, super small. They're tiny, those little things. And put Berserks in a place where you need them. Normally, you put berserks inside of a big tank. You don't really want to necessarily push that big tank into certain situations. You got to save it. You got to protect it. It is durable, but you also kind of want to hang back, not get touched. With the little baby cars, you have a place to deliver berserks and keep that big tank in a different place. You have to have, we mentioned the Forge Master, the Tech Marine, basically, he's there to buff the super tank, so it makes it very, very difficult to kill. He's blocking attacks, making 0, healing for 4. You got to have that guy.
For
he's
sure.
just good. And in the backfield, he's a 5-man character unit, so he can stretch out on objectives. He can advance and do actions. So since you're so slow, on the rare cases that you take like banners or something, he's the guy that's running out there to try to get banners doing actions, because everyone else is either in a transport or they're shooting and attacking. They're not hanging around doing actions. And then you have the 2 units of Thunderkin, right? So those are my favorite units. They did the most work for me at Cherokee. I got both beams and grab, so I was kind of playing around with it.
They're fantastic.
I thought grab was the way, right? Like, I love grab. But when you play against demons, you only get 2 damage. So like, it's not as useful against the demon matchup because they don't have any good armor stats. But the beams are flat 3. And when you could come in from reserves, that's a big change in Arks, right? That used to cost you 2 command points to put that big unit in reserves. Now it's free. When you come in and you have a 34-inch range and you can line up multiple units, and all you have to do is have a judgment token on the end target to get full rerolls, you're going to drop beams and mortals on the whole kit and caboodle. You can shoot across the whole board, hit 5 units, and you just pick them all up.
It's crazy powerful.
It's dirty. So you could be like, I'm getting destroyed. I don't have anything left. It's really going bad for me. My beam guys came in, and now I just crushed this whole flank.
Just popped off.
Still in it. Yeah.
Thank you for positioning yourself in a nice line for me, mate.
Exactly. And it's hard because your tank has a beam, and a lot of people are like, I'm hiding behind this ruin. I'm trying to avoid getting beamed, but I want to peek this corner. And now all of a sudden you come in from a flank, and you're just shooting across the whole back line, and they're just like, I hope you have screened well, because this is 34 inches. That's a long way to potentially not get beamed. Right?
It absolutely is, dude. We're going to have to power on a little bit, but thank you very much for this. Sorry, did you mention the Hecaton at the end?
I did. So the big tank at the end. Do you want 1 or 2? I only have the 1 just to fit in all the other units, but I like it. It's not full beams. I do have like bolters on it, so it's a little bit longer range, but that plays well with the little baby car. So you have the standoff range at shooting at 34-40 inches. You can just sit back and shoot if they want to hide long range, and then you can force that action where you can push them into you, where you have berserks to kind of counterattack.
Beautiful. All right, so moving on, we will do a couple of minutes here on Tau and Necrons to the best of our ability. Ben, give us your impressions of the state of Tau and the best things going for them.
State of Tau, a little bit of a rough place post nerf. They were one of the most popular factions at LVO, and now they're going to be one of the least popular factions that you'll see across some majors, but they still have a bit of good things going for them. Hammerheads are still awesome. They still have relatively decent secondaries. The Arks of Omen detachment makes their army a lot easier to build, and you aren't nearly as troop taxed. And crisis suits are still crisis suits. Like, at the end of the day, that unit still lifts the entire army.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to run crisis suits, you can totally go into Riptides, because Riptides are still a great unit by themselves, and taking 3 of those is more than happy. So as far as like where they're at, I think they're definitely in like a middle of the road area. They're not the table U turn 1 type of army they were, but they're also not the I got paired into Tau, I feel bad for them.
Exactly right. I feel like they're maybe bottom middle. Like, they're not bottomed out. They're not at the bottom of the meta, they're not at the bottom of the pile, but they're certainly not pushing the A tier, the S tiers. Thomas, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Tau have that potential to shoot you to bits. If you have a lot of high targets, if you're like Knight Army, even Votann, I don't necessarily want to play against Tau and get shot by their units, but they do have it rough. Like, we're in the kind of same boat secondary wise. Like, they want to kill you, they want to hang out to the end of the game and score decisive action and then get all their exploding attacks at the end. So they're very specific in some of those builds, how you do it. And like you said, you're leaning on the Riptides and the crisis suits, and then a couple of commanders, right? So the builds start to get kind of very staticky. You always have the same units. They're always doing the same things. So it's hard to innovate when you have those types of lists.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Could possibly be to a position of getting a little bit stale, because it has been like they just are starting to just get less and less and less and less stuff. Like almost every other balanced starter slate, every other mission pack, they just seem to have less things on the table. What are the worst things going for him? I think we've already pretty much covered a lot of those as well. But in addition, I think the worst thing going for him is the fact that terrain is ubiquitously getting better on tables. And I know people will look at that and be like, I mean, we all want that, right? But at the same time, as a Tau player, you really struggle to build lists at times, and it forces you to make some interesting choices. Is Fish of Fury just having to be a thing? Like, can a Riptide sit in the back of the board and actually see things of relevance if it's just going to jump up to this terrain piece, be not obscure, jump back off, things of that ilk? One of the good things, though, that have going for them is that you no longer need to take Farsight to take 2 commanders into detachment. You can just take 2, pay a CP. And I think that is very good for unlocking a couple of other things, notably Borkan. I think maybe coming to the fore in a lot of ways. A lot of Storm Shields are back in the game. Custodians are making a big resurgence as well. There is a lot of need and want to have a big old thing to slap down, ignores invuln. And then, of course, if you want to double down on that, you actually have the power to with things like Hammerheads. Anything other on the worst side of things hanging out for you, or the good side, even, Ben?
Well, I mean, Tau did just win a major I attended a little bit ago down here in Arizona, piloted by Jason McKenzie, and he had kind of an interesting list overall. And one thing I like to call out in that list is that broadsides in Borken are that's a mess. That will definitely speed some things up.
It's a thing, mate. It's an absolute thing. And yeah, making hammerheads broadsides feel good again is only going to be good for the meta as well. You got anything to add to there, Mr. Byrd?
Yeah, I mean, it's sad that you just don't see that many broadsides. So hopefully something of that will come back, because I mean that's just a classic iconic unit of the Tau, right? And you're like, they're just kind of left aside on the wayside, right? You have to go back because broadsides are great, right? So like I'd like to see more of those come into the list.
I'd like to see more breaches. Strength 6 AP2 with options for a bunch of extra other buffs on top and ignores cover and Markelize and all those things. I just feel like that's just going to wreck Marines. It's going to be good at wrecking Marines. I mean, obviously they wreck you really well back, but hey, that's something at least. I'm just not quite sure what that list looks like. Staying with you, Thomas, what do you think Tau need, if anything, at the moment, either nerfed-wise or buffed-wise?
Well, I think you nailed it on the head about breachers of the troops, right? Why would you take any of their troops, right? You don't have
exactly.
Arks.
That's true.
Where's the incentive, right? Like, you got to make that unit worthwhile. Does that make them cheaper? Does that make them have some special rules? Does that give them some bonuses? Like, they already have some killing units, right? But like, it would be neat to have some other flexibility. Kroot, outside of like scouting up and doing things, like, there's all these old lists where you had like Kroot mercenaries and Kroot hounds, and you have the Forge Road Kroot, I forget what they're called. There's just cool things, that you never get to see a lot of in Tau that give them some flavor. So I think it'd be great if they buffed up those things or gave them some new lease on life, just to kind of make it interesting for the Tau guys, man. Like, come on, man, there's some cool stuff in there you never use. When's the last time you saw Ghost Kill? Like, those things,
spot on.
Like, those are cool models. Like a Storm Surge, right?
Sorry, go Ben.
Yeah, it's a surprisingly wide codex that doesn't see a lot of play. So like there's so much depth that they could add to that codex outside of like the current units, because we all want to like look at the recent meta and be like, oh, okay, maybe we want to see that back. But like when's the last time you saw Piranha? Come on, there's so many things they could just bring back and make decent.
Yeah, spot on. And I totally agree. That's pretty much what I was saying at the start. It just feels like it's a codex that's getting narrower and narrower and narrower. Almost by like every 6 months, the codex just gets narrower in the units that you can use. Where instead, I would love to have been seeing them, nerf this, buff this, nerf this, buff this. It seems like Tau exclusively have been dealt with just the nerf side of the bat, the hammer, and I haven't got any of the buff side on many things. I'm going to give you guys an example list that I just pulled off Goonhammer. You can just go to Goonhammer, click on 40k stats, go to the faction top fours, and I've got Jason McKenzie's list from the Scorched Earth Open, so the one before the Dice Hammer one that he just won, because of course we already told you kind of one of the wrinkles of that. And he's got another Borkan list. He's got a Commander in Colstar. He's got an Ethereal. He's got 10 breaches and 2x10 Kroot. Big fatty unit of Crisis with Burst, Cyclic, and Plasmas, of course. A couple of shield, everyone with a shield generator. steam injector on one of them, 4 Marcus 6 shield drones. He's got the Farsight Marksman here as well. Actually, is this the same list? This is exactly the same list he took the other one. He's got Farsight Marksman with 3 sniper drones. And Ben, what the hell is this unit, and why is it here?
The Farsight Marksman with the sniper drones. You'd honestly have to ask Jason.
Wild.
I only got to see that list play a little bit, and usually when I walked over when I was done with my game, his opponent was mostly tabled. His games were not very.
Okay.
His games didn't go very long.
I don't understand what that unit's doing. So
that guy's the guy you can't target unless you're like within 12 inches,
Correct.
right? He can just sit on an objective out in the back and just be like, you got to come all the way over here and get me, otherwise I'm untargetable.
yeah, that is fair. You can just sit him in the back. It doesn't matter. He's like well protected. We've got 3 into 4 Crude Hounds, a squad of 2 Tetras, 2 units of Vespid, the Mad Lad, and then 1 fatty unit of broadsides. So this is with the heavy rail rifles, the multi-tracker, and the twin SMS systems. A single Hammerhead and a single Skyray. So that is the same list he took 2 and 1 Dice Hammer with. I even think I had that on the Thursday show because I thought it was a wild list and I wanted to see how it did.
It is a wild list.
It is a wild list, man. But that's an example. You mean when the meta gets rough, you have to innovate. And I think Jason, more than anybody, is pushing that envelope on the innovation side of things. So could be a good time. Moving on, we're going to do the same for the lovely metal men of the Necrons, and then we'll be signing off and heading over to part 2. But Necrons, we'll start with yourself, Thomas. Where are they at right now? What are the best things going for them?
So obviously, I have one of our buddies is an avid Necron player. There's several Necron players here, so I see a lot of Necrons in my little local meta. So kind of as we talked about at the beginning of the show, you kind of saw their secondaries take a little bit of a hit, but you see a lot of people like run away from them. You know, like they're just not as prevalent. And then again, you know, from my perspective, the couple lists that I play from Ultramarines and from Votann, I'm just not threatened by Votann or by Necrons. Like I know what they're going to do. I've seen what their units do, and it just doesn't scare me. So I don't know what has effectively changed, but you know, from the Necron perspective, there's a lot of variety there. I've seen some big rush lists. When she kind of went away from the I can't take the pregame OBSEC,
Yeah,
and you know that really I think that was the big change, right? Like it wasn't the secondary change, it was that was really what kind of broke it open for Necrons and made it not easy mode 40k, right? You had to think a little bit. You had to do some work. It just didn't just run up and kill people. I think that's one of the things I see a lot is the Necrons don't necessarily kill a lot of stuff these days. There's a lot of death out there in 40k land, and you don't necessarily look at Necrons and put them on the top of the killing stuff.
But you're absolutely correct.
Yeah.
What about yourself, Ben? How do you feel about Necrons at the moment? What do they have going for them?
The things I do have going for them is the OBSEC. They still have OBSEC as an option army-wide. They still have fast-moving units. They still have relatively decent secondaries, not godlike secondaries, but relatively decent secondaries. And like they didn't really get hit by any real like point nerfs that like made things unplayable. So they're still a standing army. They just also happen to the bad part about them is they also get hit by like weird meta situations, like guard ignoring wound caps and stuff like that.
Yeah, I do 100% agree with that. It makes the Catan feel a lot worse. Of course, having a triple-headed Hydra of really heavy Daclylist in Tau, Guard, and Votann in the meta becomes pretty predatory for things like the Silent King. Like he just like, oh cool, you brought the Silent King. Here are my 6 Lehman Russes, sir. Good luck trying to use your unit. You just don't. You get to use your Silent King. He just comes out and he dies instantly. And of course, then there's things like Kassakin that are very predatory. Of course, with the mortal wound dump into them, and then he had the squish that comes from just all the multi melters, all the melter guns, all the grav cannons that annihilate your kind of keystone units and your locust destroyers, your Scorpec destroyers, things of that ilk. So I'm kind of worried that they're pushed into the Silver Tide, possibly being the best way to go. Which once again, you never like to see an army have no other option but to take just mindless hordes. I know how Thomas feels about mindless hordes, but hey, Ben likes them, so full spectrum on the show. But yeah. So I'm in the Art of War stream house at the moment, and when we conceptualize some Necron lists, where usually it's built around a couple of phalanxes of 20 warriors again. You just need to bring some stability back to the game and some reliability, which is what I wanted for Votann in the case of their secondaries, and what I'm expressing right now is that Necron need to have a density of body in order, because your ability to outplay your opponent has decreased. It has decreased because you don't have the pre-game move and your secondaries aren't going to carry you. So you need to have stability, parity, and if you can't be killy, be durable or be numerous. And so that's that kind of lever I think Necron players might need to pull. What do you guys think they need, if anything, buffs or nerfs wise? We'll start with yourself, Thomas.
Yeah, I think you nailed it right on the head, right? Like durability wise, or body wise. You hate to say take the hordes, but that is a scary list. And if you can't survive, Marines just got all the killing that they needed to take out any Necron unit, right? Like there's meltas for days, there's hammers for days, all the 3 damage against those units that you have. You're fast, but you're not fast enough to defeat that level of violence. So it's tricky, right? And I think what you said is how do you tame that? Are we just holding on until 10th? Is that really around the corner this soon? Because we're talking about a couple of months from now. Like how long before things might all reset again? So I don't even know what that looks like. If I was a Necron player, I'm trying to play my best life. Like Walter, he's playing the meme list that is really actually pretty scary against some builds that skew list with the monoliths and the obelisk. It's just, there's a lot of different builds in there that you can kind of play with, and will catch some people off guard. I think that's the thing is, just don't be afraid to like experiment a little bit.
Yeah, I totally agree. Ben, what are your thoughts?
My hot take leading from that is definitely they need a codex refresh. They're one of the oldest codexes, tied for Space Marines, who got super buffed in the game, and they're missing out on so many mechanics and rules and everything that have been added and learned over this edition that they just don't get them, not without some sort of like super balanced data slate. So they need a complete refresh, like that codex. They just need new codex, honestly.
Yep, I pretty much agree with that sentiment. They have just so many rules that aren't relevant, unfortunately. And just so many things that just get circumnavigated. Like
protocols are like, okay, that's an old rule and it's not nearly as good as other people's rules. It is a codex that shows its age by far. Like it's the grandpa in the room.
Yeah, totally agree with that sentiment. Despite that, I do think there are some niche builds coming to the fore. I think Arks of Omen, like many, is forcing people to explore very polarized or very skewed list. And of course, my example then was with the all warriors or all possibly being, if you wanted to be spicy, you could go Mefrit, you could go Novok, or you could go Nihilak to have the double obsec again. I'm going to give you guys an example list of what Liam Hackett brought to a Teams event this weekend just gone at Gladiator Teams, and his team did win. He has, and if those of you do not know, Liam Hackett won the WTC singles with something similar to this. And so he's playing a Nihilak Arks of Omen detachment, and he's taken troops as his primary. He's got a single Technomancer for his HQs with the Veil of Darkness. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4 by 10 warriors, so 4 units of 10 with Ghost Reapers, 3 units of 6 Canoptic Wraiths, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 Ghost Arks and the Silent King. So he's playing the Ghost Arks again, boys. He played a 6 or 7 Ghost Ark list at WTC and to win the singles, and he just played oops all obsec, take away your primary. I'll kill your obsec, and then I'll just have guys here, there, and everywhere. The Canoptic Race are a new addition. And I'm interested to know what he's getting out of those. But having 18 race has got to be for a significant plan. Of course, Scarabs are not present here. They're pretty much what he would have had instead of the race for those points. And then, of course, 40 warriors in Force Ghost Arks, all being buffed by the Silent King. Anything there jump out to you? Because that is whack and might just be ticked for a team's list. But it is still spicy nonetheless. Who wants to jump in?
Well, I'll go first. I think race, certainly their stock went up with Lost of Armor and Contempt, right? So like 82, bounce off everybody. Now it's like 2 damage AP race, and they can fly over everybody. They're quick. They got the invulnerable save. You can just certainly rush those guys up and tie up a bunch of units, and then if you don't kill them all, they potentially can go back, or they can now fall back and start somebody else. Like race are a big problem, and they can't just stymie you. Like Guard don't want to have race running around in their back line touching all the tanks. Like that's just not a good place for them. So I don't hate race at all.
It really looks like this was, if I had to guess, this was built to be a kind of counter assault army where it just has like 4 Ghost Arks and then as like the first line, and then behind that you've got 18 Wraiths being supported by the Silent King. And cool, you go through a Ghost Arc. Here's 18 Wraith Cert that'll have full rerolls to hit from the Silent King. Mulch, num, num, num. That could be a cool way in which it was used. I did not actually get to see what it paired into. I could probably deep dive that at some point. Maybe I will for the part 2 of this show. But Ben, anything you want to mention about that list or anything else you want to add to Necrons?
That list, I really like the Wraiths because the Wraiths have a lot of really good stratagems that play well into the current meta and things like World Eater. Like you said, it looks very anti-assaulty using transports, using Wraiths. What I would like to see a World Eaters list play into this because I think it would struggle between like the fight on death and getting back up, and being able heroic intervention with your Wraiths and such like that. There's so many ways that list can just oh, you want to try and take my objective? No, thank you.
Yeah, exactly right. And also, of course, fight last after Silent King. So there's a lot of ways that this can be a pain for any assault-based army. And then the shooting isn't nothing. It's not great, but it ain't nothing. Having all the rerolls from the Silent King shoots pretty well himself. So that is an interesting list of people to keep an eye on. Apart from that, I don't think Necrons are in as bad a place as the internet would have you think. I think they can still play a very reliable secondary game. They can still score extremely well. I lost a game at Uprising versus one of the better Necron players in Australia named Igor. He just went first and scored. I think he scored mid-90s. And then it turns out if he just disrupted my primary twice, which he did by rushing it, it was impossible for me to score more points than him. He scored 2 more points than me because I scored after he disrupted my primary. I scored every available point after that, and I got about 94, and I think he got about 96, or was it 84, 86? I don't know. One of those. And he was just like, cool. Impossible to capture. And I was scrambling, trying to find a way, find a means. And it's just, you can just still do that sometimes. But anyway.
Were you playing Grey Knight? What were you playing, Adam?
I was playing predominantly Ravenwing Dark Angels.
Oh, Dark Angels.
Yeah. So he just went first, got all his secondary train choo-choo going, and then he just dive bombed my primary and gave me 2 4s, and then I maxed all my secondaries, and he took 8 points off my primary total, I think. And so I ended up on 37 points, and yeah, it wasn't enough. It was literally 2 points short. And I couldn't end up doing this. I did the same. I ended up almost tabling him on turn 5. Didn't matter. All the scoring was already done. And that's the thing I think you need to focus on. The modus operandi from Nephilim for Necrons has not changed. It's the same thing. It's just a little bit harder. So get good, essentially. Gentlemen, on that note, we will wrap up this part 1. I do apologize if we didn't do the Tau or the Necrons justice. I knew from the outset that we weren't going to have the experts on to do that. I will have either a Tau expert or a Necrons expert on for the next episode. I do not know which one that will be at the moment. I've got a couple of people in mind, and we'll just see who can make the time slot work. But thank you, everyone who has joined over and jumped in the Discord server. Thank you to all the continued incredible support from the Patreons. Ben, anything you'd like to plug or say or shout out before you go? I know you're off to the Rocky Mountain Open. So you want to Babe Ruth your shot?
It's a difficult meta to win in singles, but I'm hoping to make a podium. So
fantastic.
As far as plugs, I got my local team, Smite Club, and then big shout out to Team USA, and look forward to seeing everyone across the pond.
Beautiful. I'll be seeing you myself as well, but I won't be there as a competitor, unlike yourself. Thomas, say your goodbyes, say your goodnights, and plug anything you'd like to plug, my man.
Yeah, so thanks obviously for having me, Adam. It's always a pleasure to talk with you and to talk Warhammer. So the plugs, Tabletop Life, that's our YouTube channel. Come check us out. Shout out to my boy Jaime Perez. He's going to be out there representing Team America, so happy to have him out there with you guys. He's a fantastic, just all-around gentleman, and he's a great 40K player, so I can't be more proud of him and representing us. So, and then, from a tournament perspective, I think there's a tournament every week. So I have Ultramarines to represent as well as the Votann. So I got to figure out how I'm going to play some Ultramarines on the next one. I got so many people asking me, these guys aren't blue. Where are the Ultramarines? So I have to come up with Ultramarine for the next one.
I did say that to you, some cringy.
You weren't the only.
I know. I was surprised you didn't paint them blue as well, your Votann. I was expecting them to be blue when I saw you playing them. I had to have a different color.
I was actually using them like my little black and red dragon dice. If you ever played against me, I get a lot of comments or hate about my dragon dice rolling hot. I just roll a lot of 6s. That's my whole strategy. And I was like, going to make a custom army that was going to use that logo. So I just haven't got around to doing the decals yet. But that's why red. It just happens to be the same as Ymir, as it turns out.
There you go. All right, on that note, we will be done. Thank you so much again, gentlemen. Hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. Hopefully see you on part 2. Catch us there.
Thank you for listening to Art of War Down Under, a content review podcast for Warhammer 40K, hosted by Adam Camilleri, produced by Seamus Ronan. Enjoyed the show? Want your lists reviewed and the content you heard put into practice? Sign up to our Patreon and connect with us online or on Facebook. Just search for Art of War Down Under. Signing out from tomorrow.